Hello everybody and welcome to another live stream. So for today's live stream I'm actually going to show you the finished product or the finished image compared to where we last left off. So I did a lot of work on the side which I did not do during live stream, specifically just to help narrow down the time span that this image would take. Because these images do take quite a while because they're very detailed, and B, I'm also working from a very rough concept and building out a very complete piece all in one go. So I'm actually skipping about 5 steps. Um, so because of that, I'm actually going to start off with the initial image that I left off in last week's stream. So let me just turn off this title card here. And I'll also give you guys some quick updates at the end of this video because I actually have some pretty exciting projects that I'm working on. And this image is actually going to be included in it. So if I turn off this title card. So last week we left off actually pretty much here. So what I did before I could even start painting or adding any of the textures is I did finish this one region here for the shadows. And then did some minor tweaks here and there. But with the paint effects, there's a big difference. So as you can see here, I have more of an atmospheric effect going on. You can actually see that there's actually a difference between the buildings where you can actually tell that certain parts are receding and certain parts are coming forward. And because I am using Affinity Designer for this, the workflow was different than what I would normally typically do in Photoshop. So in Photoshop, you can be a little bit more chaotic, but you shouldn't be, which is kind of interesting balance between it. You can just keep adding layers until you have a very dynamic separation between the different elements. Now, with this image, I actually really wanted to get the same effects that I was getting in Photoshop, but with Affinity Designer. And it meant changing my workflow quite a bit. But in most cases, once you figured it out, it actually wasn't that bad. It actually, A, was more efficient as long as you kept everything well organized. And the end result was actually a little bit easier to deal with. So I'd say from a production point of view, if I were to give this to an animation studio, they would actually, in theory, have a better time taking this and then reusing it because the elements are already pre-separated properly. Now, that being said, I was also focusing on doing that because I did want to see if it was even possible. But I do think that the software actually might be better for background designs for specific styles similar to this. There are certain styles it may not work correctly for or as easily for, but it should still be adaptable. And the big reason is because you can switch between a vectorized mode in Affinity Designer and a pixel mode where you can actually paint with brushes. And over time they have expanded this. So what were the workflow differences? So in Photoshop, I would have been using a lot of clipping masks. I would have added clipping masks to the lines to help add all these colors. But in Affinity Photo, it works a bit differently. So what you do is you take all your layers and you flatten them up. So you expand the line art and then combine them all so that you have one solid layer. Now, you normally do that to a duplicate because you obviously don't want to mess with your original, but by doing so, you can actually just literally add the gradient right to that line art. So that, let me just actually pick up some line work here. So for this building here, if I hit the gradient tool, oh, I might have flattened it, which would be unfortunate. Okay, let's see. Try it with this one. Okay, I might not have it anymore. Oh, wait, there we go. There you go. So, this is actually the flattened and combined curves, but the cool thing about that is if you go in here, you can actually change these colors so that essentially gives more of a blending effect. You do have to play with it a bit, but it's nice because it's a non-destructive method of coloring your line art. And because of the way Affinity Designer actually organizes its layers, essentially it's the complete reverse of Photoshop, where you normally use clipping masks. This one is a nested layer within a layer and layer, and you can keep on going as many times as you want. The one downside is that with the new versions of Photoshop, you can essentially clip to a group. There is pros and cons to that. The pros is it's a lot easier when you're doing a conceptual piece, but it makes it a lot harder if those have not been simplified before an artist gets it. So in this case, it forces the proper workflow, and I think over time that's actually going to be something that's more useful. And I'm hoping kind of the industry might actually develop or implement this workflow in the future, because it does make coloring the line work a lot easier and more time efficient, which at the end of the day means people make more money, and more money means that you can lower your overall cost to the point where hopefully you can get better talent and stuff like that. So, and there's less delays because I forget what the numbers are, but just one day of a delay in a production means that you're losing several thousands of dollars per day, because it has a tiered effect where it just keeps on causing more and more delays. And it's not easy to deal with when that happens. So, like I said, there's pros and cons. It's a bit harder for the initial concept. You have to actually keep in mind, and you have to actually fill the colors in properly if you want it to work correctly for you. But this workflow does seem to be working quite well. So I'm curious to see if maybe in the future some studios decide to go with this. They may not. Honestly, most people have Photoshop, but it would be interesting if they did try it at least. So yeah, coloring the line art, it's a lot easier. Within this line art, I was able to, in this section here, actually just paint in the highlights as well, using a texture brush that came with the software. I am actually using the default, I believe, brushes. No, I have a couple of extra ones. So there's a Adobe pack that if you were an early adopter of this software, you would have gotten. I did get that one, and I did install on my other computer. So I did use, I think, a textured brush from there. They have Cloud Brush that simulates clouds and textures very well. So it's actually only 3 brushes I used for this, because the texture work is not a huge amount. So yeah, doing the coloring and line art was super easy. The part that takes the longest is definitely adding your initial shadows. So if I go back to this part here, this is the part that's time consuming. You spend extra time on this, but then it saves you time later on if you want to have, once again, the proper workflow. So how I approach this generally is I would look at the line art and be like, okay, so this is a major area for shadows. I'm going to put this all on one layer and then nest within that darker and darker layers, but have a solid color, which often means that you do need to play with your colors. You can't really see it. Let me just make this smaller so you can actually see what I'm looking at here. So as default, it does give you the color wheel, which is very useful. However, I am at this point, because I've had so many years with Photoshop, I'm actually used to doing it essentially a bit harder. So if you click on here, yeah, you can actually change this to SLI sliders. For me, this is just easier, something I got used to. So I actually predominantly use this. It makes it a bit faster when you're doing shadow areas too. But switching between the two actually helps. So for my initial colors, I actually use the color wheel, because the color wheel helps make sure that all the colors match together. Let me just maximize that again. However, the HLS slider makes it so that I know the shadows are the right colors, and it can just tweak them a bit faster. So that makes it a bit faster for that type of workflow. But that is also a personal preference, so not everybody would find it as easily attainable. Foreground element, same thing. All I did straight up is flatten all the layer or all the line art after I duplicated it, and then added a gradient, and then added a separate layer for these highlights. It works really well. It's very efficient. You can just go in, brush it in, and then just clean it up after. It makes for a very quick paint technique, essentially. I think the total paint time was maybe maximum 3-4 hours. And this is me fiddling with different techniques and stuff like that, and trying to figure out how to do this more efficiently. So I do think that based on these results, that I might actually transition to Affinity Designer in general for a lot of my workflow. There's going to be some things, like I said, that doesn't work as well yet. For line work, I do find the fact that it does not have the distort tool available as of yet. It does hinder some of the techniques I would normally use that are just more time efficient, such as creating templates and then reusing those templates just to increase the speed at which I can do my workflow. So some of those still need to be added in. As far as I know, Affinity Designer is aware of it, but it's probably going to be a couple years before they implement it. But honestly, for the price, I can't complain. It's a perpetual license too, so that actually goes a pretty long way. But I would consider it a fairly essential tool. But they have added other tools since their first initial implementation, which works better. As of yet, I've tried using their Affinity Photo, and I'll be honest, I actually don't like their Affinity Photo, mainly because the magic wand is not a multi-selectable layer. They have the brush selection tool, which is okay, but that's for photography mainly. For my type of workflow, it just wouldn't be something that would work very well. But honestly, based on these results, I probably won't even touch Affinity Photo at this time. And compared to Illustrator, the stuff Affinity Designer is actually working a lot better. Like I said, it's missing some core features like the distort for the line art, but there is a lot of pros, like being able to paint with the brushes natively goes a long way. So what I may try to do, just to really push the limits of Affinity Photo, because I haven't played enough with it, is I might actually try to do a more complex piece. I have used it to do some initial prop designs. Actually, I might be able to show you guys that prop design. Because it was a pretty specific one. And that one is posted on my Instagram. I did not post it, I think, anywhere else. So, where is it? I believe it was actually this one here. Let's see if we can load this. Yeah. So this one was actually, I believe, painted not in Photoshop, but in Affinity Photo. It's definitely one of the prop designs I was testing out because I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but I did want to essentially get used to it. So now that you've seen the final piece that I actually just finished up, I want to give you guys a quick heads up. Dark Waves, which I came out with a couple years ago in 2014, I believe. You'll be able to actually order it on my website directly shortly. Not yet. I'm ordering a proof right now. So just to make sure that it is the same level of quality that I'm used to seeing. But that will be available as soon as it's fully available. It will be available on both my Facebook and my website. And you will actually be able to purchase it directly. But there is a second book, which I actually started about 2 years ago, that actually has all my backgrounds from then. And that's called Explorations. That should be coming out in a couple weeks. I'm doing some final edits to it. I do want to make sure it's properly done before I release it. And I do have to order some proofs before I can actually make it public. So that will be coming out, and this background is actually included because I still have the ability to keep on adding until I'm actually ready to publish. But once the editing starts for it, I won't be adding any more backgrounds. That'll be it. There is some prop designs, so there's also some of my older concept art. It is more geared towards background layouts though. So whereas the first book was actually more geared towards a general overview of my art and a lot more character-based stuff. This book is specifically geared towards background paintings and the line art that I do for those background paintings. So it's going to be a short video today, but I sincerely hope you guys enjoyed this live stream, and I hope to see you guys again. Thank you and take care.